beautiful song that is. Pat, I know that that's going to be your walk-up song for our fantasy draft because we make an entrance.
You can't just spoil it. Some of them listen.
Look, it doesn't matter. It's going to be fucking hilarious. I will say this. I had to find it on Spotify. I didn't have to. I mean, I could have just dug it up on YouTube regardless, but I found it on Spotify. So it gets to go in the playlist of all the other janky songs that we have for our fantasy football entrances.
I'm honestly concerned if mine was one of the more tame.
Yours is the most tame by a mile so far. So, yeah, for anybody that's confused, we do official entrances for only our first picks of each round our first round picks, because that would be forever if we tried to make this whole theatrical entrance for every round.
They take forever anyway.
First, they do. It does take forever. I mean, Andy and Steve just take 7 hours to make each of their picks, so it is what it is. But guys, welcome back to the podcast alongside Pat Gustafson. I am Brandon Carney. Look, if you guys are watching on YouTube and you prefer, listening on audio platforms, we are on Spotify or Apple or whatever podcast platform you prefer. Links are on our channel for that. And if you are listening on Spotify, Apple, or wherever else after the fact, come hang with us on YouTube sometime. We're going to generally be live 7:30 Eastern going forward on Tuesdays. So come hang with us live if you want. And we'll have some fun. Just search Off the Bench with Benchwarmer Brand on YouTube. That's my plug for the day. And
for those of you that prefer Austin Eckler to be here, so do we.
Yeah, I meant to tell you guys, we're actually going to have Patrick Mahomes as a get. No, we're not going to do that. Maybe in 10 years when he's retired and I'm also retired. Who knows? 10 years is a long time away, so I have no idea what to expect there. But I guess, Pat, we might as well get into where's our little thing here. Oh, yeah, right.
Good evening. I'm Ron Burgundy, and this is what's happening in your world tonight.
I mean, I got to use it while we have it, right? So, everyone, here is our news and notes for the week. We were just talking off camera about how this once-a-week show leaves room for a lot of news to accumulate. We're going to lead with something that you may not expect us to lead with because there are some bigger stories, but the Ravens lost. 24-game preseason win streak comes to an end. The funniest streak of all time, because it's one of those streaks that's It's an accident, right? Like they are not trying to win all of these preseason games. Everyone's just trying to evaluate their players and stuff, and the Ravens just so happen to fall ass backwards into 24 straight preseason wins. But at the hands of Jake Fromm and Joey Sly last night, it all came to an end, and I'm just, I had a good time. I was happy that it was the first preseason game that the fourth quarter has ever mattered in, because preseason can matter for evaluating players and seeing who's going to start and all that stuff, trying to win starting jobs. But this one, there was actually almost a competitiveness to it, like you're rooting for something. So it gave us just a little taste of real football. I had a blast. Did you watch it live or did you just follow it?
I didn't even follow it. Like, I was busy last night and I got home and I saw Joey Sly looking like he won the fucking Super Bowl after kicking a 49-yarder to win a preseason game. Just insane. I mean, think about it. So what, they knocked the preseason down to 3 games last year. So it's like 6 years. They hadn't lost a preseason game in like 6 years.
It's actually 8 years. 2015 was the last time they lost a preseason game because 2020 COVID season, the entire preseason was canceled.
Well, that's right.
And as for the last couple of years, it's been only 3 games per year. So it's been, getting up to 24. It took 8 years. I made a video today about how the last time they lost a preseason game, Hotline Bling had just been released by Drake, and Lamar Jackson had still yet to play a single college down. He had not played his first college game yet. So it's been a while, but it was a fun one to watch. I think it illustrates how thirsty we are for real football, but it was the closest thing it felt to real football that I think you can really get to in the preseason, because we were like, there was something on the line, as small as it may be. Some bigger news here, some injury notes. So Jackson Smith-Njigba is undergoing wrist surgery, according to Curtis Crabtree from Fox 13 Seattle. Pete Carroll says that JSN has a slight fracture and they want to make sure they do things right. It's a 3 to 4 week issue, and they're staying optimistic about his timeline. It puts week 1 very much in question. I think this is kind of the first... Not the first injury. I mean, we've had guys, Tim Patrick go down for the year and some other unfortunate, Russell Gage go down for the year. Unfortunate injuries like that, but this is definitely the most impactful fantasy injury that is, has a risk of bleeding into week 1. So JSN potentially out for week 1. We'll have to see and just follow it closely. But man, Tyler Lockett just will not die, will he? I've been trying to write this guy. I know he wasn't going to anyway, but I've been trying to write this guy off for years, and I really thought that, he still has his value this year, but I really still think that this will be the year that he takes a bit of a step back just in favor of JSN. But now, man, something in the universe is just pro Tyler Lockett. I don't know what it is. It does make me feel a little better about DK Metcalf, and maybe I'm overthinking something that may only go 1 week in, but it's an unfortunate thing that has happened to maybe the most exciting rookie not named Bijan Robinson for this upcoming year, offensively at least.
But you got to think about it. They are not going to play any games with this. If he needs to miss more time, he's going to miss more time. You're not going to put your star rookie in there at the beginning of the year just to possibly get hurt again. I do not think they're going to put him out there until he's ready. And, I'd say maybe it might even be 1 or 2 games, and I'd be a little surprised if he played week 1.
Yeah, I will say this. If anything, this may bump his ADP down to a point where you could actually feel somewhat comfortable taking him. I mean, his draft position has been crazy for a guy who is going to be the 3rd target on this team. I don't know as much as I want him to kind of overtake Tyler Lockett's role, how much that's really going to materialize this year. So this is a guy that if you're drafting, Jackson Smith-Njigba, you're banking on the talent, you're banking on Geno Smith staying good, and that's fine. But also he is a guy he's in a little bit of a crowded receiver room. Maybe this will dip his ADP down just a bit, round or 2, people get nervous, and you can get this super talented guy and actually wait things out appropriately without having him, be your starting flex guy for
I don't think he should have been regardless. I've been pretty
sure
not out
that's
on him,
fair.
but I have not been nearly as bullish on JSN as a lot of people. So I wasn't planning on drafting him anyway, and now I am definitely not drafting him.
See, I wasn't planning on drafting, but now I'm like, I'll wait and see. Like, if he falls far enough,
if it falls,
there's so much uncertainty. Yeah, no, that ADP was definitely a little too rich for me as well. Terry McTurfto. So Terry McLaurin, one of the victims of this preseason victory, kept him in a little bit longer than I think most people would have expected, and he came out of it with a toe injury. So Terry McLaurin is not expected to be a serious injury. Optimistic that he'll be ready for week 1, but just one of those things, preseason injury that you don't want to see, and kind of reminds you to maybe not play somebody that long when he's your best offensive player in the preseason. They beat the Ravens, but at what cost? So keep an eye on the Terry McLaurin injury. That's all we have for now, is that, there's optimism. He'll be ready for week 1. Certainly more optimism, it sounds like, than JSN at this moment in time. But look, either way, Jahan Dotson to the moon. He looked good. The Commanders overall looked pretty good. So that's just kind of my takeaway there is Jahan Dotson. That's my boy. And maybe we'll talk about him a little. No, we're not going to. We have our My Guys segment later. That's a tease. I considered putting Jahan Dotson as one of my My Guys. We're going to go one player. Dotson. Yeah, I thought you might. So we'll get to who you ended up picking over him a little bit later. But yeah, we picked one player from each position that we are we'll just say very bullish on for fantasy. Doesn't necessarily matter where they're being drafted. It's just guys that I guess you could describe it as we firmly think they'll outdo their current ADP. But or it's just somebody that we're excited for, even if we think they'll meet the ADP, whatever you want to call it. But guys that we are very excited for. So stay tuned.
You guys are going to love our segment on Chase McLaughlin later.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, he just won a starting job. I mean, it's going to be
kickers
a
are people too. Not really.
Nah, only Justin Tucker's a person, but that's about all I got. But yeah, My Guy segment. I mean, look, every fantasy podcast on earth seems to be doing this segment. We're gonna it's gonna be Brand's Boys and Pat's People, just so we can have. I
changed it to Pat's Pals, awful. Actually.
Oh, Pat's Pals. Oh, even better. I love it. I didn't read the show sheet because I'm illiterate. Okay, Jonathan Taylor. Let's get to the really big news here.
The big one today. Yeah.
This is certainly the big one. Just I had to get the injury notes out of the way, and of course the big Ravens news. But Jonathan Taylor has been permitted to seek a trade. Another sort of step in this saga that has plagued the last couple of weeks of the preseason and training camp. It looks like Jim Irsay is a dirty liar. He said, we're not going to trade Jonathan Taylor, not now, not in October. And I made a joke that, well, he said not now in July. It is August, so I guess this is one of the months that technically he
also gave himself September as well. He's really got a lot of room to work with.
That is true. So JT permitted to seek a trade. Look, the overarching, vibe of this is it's probably going to be hard for him to find a trade partner. Running backs, as we know, are not valued very well right now. And the great irony that everybody's also pointing out is that the Colts don't want to pay Jonathan Taylor as if he is an elite player, but they want trade compensation that would reflect him being an elite player. You can't really have it both ways. So the request or the ask right now is a first-round pick or something equivalent. So maybe 2 seconds or something like that. I can tell you guys right now, the Colts will not be receiving a first-round pick for Jonathan Taylor.
Because even the teams that we're going to talk about that are the most running back needy, they don't need to do something. They don't need Jonathan Taylor. Like they were planning on going into the year with what they had, so they're going to be perfectly content. So the Colts have no leverage in this situation with JT and with other teams.
Right. And, not to compare Dalvin Cook, who's on the tail end of his career, to a guy like Jonathan Taylor, but the lack of interest and the lack of movement in the market for a guy like Dalvin Cook, I think, is reflective of how teams are going to approach Jonathan Taylor as well, right? Because while Dalvin Cook is, maybe half of what JT is at this point in his career, when JT's fully healthy, of course, he also wasn't going to cost significant draft capital for you to bring him in. Jonathan Taylor's going to cost significant draft capital and, in theory, a contract extension, because any team that's going to give up that sort of capital is going to want him around for more than this year. This is not going to be a one-year thing. That's kind of the crux of Taylor's issue to begin with. He wants to be locked down and get some money for his production, and I think that's fair. So, Pat, I wrote down about 5 teams here that I think could be at least, somewhat reasonable fits. But again, I don't know that a trade gets done. The one team I will offer up is the team I offered up the last time we had this conversation, and it's the Chicago Bears. I think they make the most sense from a timeline and from a salary cap and from a draft pick perspective. They have, an extra second rounder kicking around. Like I said, they have 2 firsts as well for next year, but I don't think I don't think the Colts are getting a first for JT. They have an extra second rounder kicking around for next year. Maybe they offer that up. But you look at just their timeline, assuming Justin Fields is the guy, assuming the connection with him and DJ Moore pans out to something that they, are hoping that it pans out to be. This is a team that their championship, quote unquote, theoretical window a couple years from now would line up with the prime of JT's career. What they're aiming for would line up with JT's prime. So maybe they go get a guy like JT. Look, you and I have talked about Khalil Herbert and how we do like him and how his usage in the preseason makes us optimistic for him from a fantasy perspective. But let's face it, this is a backfield that could absolutely use a guy like Jonathan Taylor. Khalil Herbert is not a mitigating factor for acquiring a guy like JT. So I offer them up as sort of the most logical place from just draft capital, timeline, salary cap, and that's kind of what I've got. But the other teams I put here just for note, Dolphins, Eagles, Bills, and Chiefs. Pat, do any of those stand out to you as good of or better or close to as good fits as the Bears?
Well, I think they're all similar in the sense that, just like Khalil Herbert, while they're crowded backfields, any of these backfields would step aside for Jonathan Taylor. Like, Jonathan Taylor's 100%. Value would only go up in any of these situations. I don't care who's in that backfield. They are going to clear the way for Jonathan Taylor. It's not going to be like we were worried about Dalvin Cook in the sense like, he's just going to go muddy something up because he's not going to get a ton of carries regardless. But Jonathan Taylor is going to be the alpha almost anywhere he goes, especially any of these 5 teams. I really like Kansas City in this situation here.
Unfortunately.
I mean, that would just be unfair, but they've just gone to show that they're kind of running back is kind of an afterthought for them in terms of like actually going out and, I mean, they tried. They took CEH in the first round, and he is bad. And I saw that he was a first round pick, so that's fair compensation. He's equal to a first round pick, so why don't they just ship him straight up for JT?
They
the
picked
Bill
him
O'Brien
over JT.
playbook.
They picked him over JT, so I mean, maybe they'll be like,
well,
he's better.
I think just from that perspective, and like obviously we love Isaiah Pacheco, what he did last year, especially in the playoffs, but you can easily, that is someone that can easily be brushed aside for a guy like Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, and my thing with, like, you bring up Pacheco, I mean, if that trade were to materialize, I feel like Pacheco probably just goes the other way. I mean, you trade Pacheco, who's in the second year of a deal, and although we don't know exactly what he can be, he's a mid-round pick. Was he late round?
I believe he's a 6th round pick. Maybe
I couldn't remember. For some reason, I had it in my head that he was
very late. Definitely the last 2 rounds.
Let me just look it up really quick. Got his freaking Wikipedia. Pick 251, round 7. Okay, I knew it was late. I couldn't remember exactly how late. So, yeah, Pacheco's a guy in the second year of his career that, could easily go the other way. I don't think that he's a guy that needs to be on a depth chart behind Jonathan Taylor if it came to it. That just seems like, I'm sure the Chiefs would be thrilled about it, but I don't think that's fair to Pacheco to do that. I think they would probably send him the other way, and it would make the draft compensation maybe not as much because the Colts would be like, cool, we're getting a pretty quality running back here who runs like he hates the ground, as a famous comment I saw just describes him perfectly. I love watching him play. But yeah, the Chiefs would make sense just from a, let's take this over the top point of view. But I don't know. They operate so well without a star running back that it's like, why? Then you've got the Eagles. The Eagles also have some extra draft picks here over the next couple of years. And we talked last week about how they don't have a ton invested in this backfield from either draft capital or money. And it'd be very funny if the answer to, oh, God, is it Gainwell, is it Swift, is it Penny? Imagine the answer is just Jonathan Taylor. I mean, that'd be fantastic. So I think that's a possibility. I think Eagles and Bears are, sort of at my top. I've seen the Dolphins floated quite a bit. Again, I don't know. they don't seem to care either, like about getting an extra running back here. It would probably be a good idea with Raheem Mostert's injury history and, Jeff Wilson not being the youngest guy either. Devon Achane having a shoulder injury, it would be a fit, but I just don't see them as quite as good of a fit as a team like the Bears or the Eagles, and just as logical, whatever, of a trade partner. So ultimately, I kind of fall on the side of everybody else that I don't really think a trade gets done. It seems like this is going to be just Jonathan Taylor ends up coming back to the Colts and grinding this year out. I'll say this, if he does get traded, Pat, unless I hear otherwise, I am immediately no longer worried about this stupid ankle, because we have still not heard any reason why his ankle should be bothering him. Like, yeah, we talked about it a couple shows ago. The Colts just kind of expect us to see ankle and be like, well, yeah, he hurt it last year. That's still why he's out. No, the surgery he got only had a couple-week timetable, and they never reported a setback or anything like that. And if he's just having chronic soreness, I mean, he's got to be out of the ankle is,
I believe, the sorest guy in the world.
I believe the ankle is a complete smokescreen. And I will say also this about Jonathan Taylor. If he does get traded, this is maybe the biggest fantasy football, what's the word I'm looking for here? Not league winner, but I guess, biggest range of outcomes, because this guy, I'm assuming the ankle will be fine if he goes somewhere, and then you immediately have one of the best talent running backs in the NFL on a team where he's happy and might get extended. And, if you're getting this guy, his ADP right now is in the late second because of all the uncertainty. This is like a fantasy grenade that could get dropped on a team and just blow them into first place all year.
Could you imagine he goes to Philadelphia, the best rushing offense in the league? I mean, granted, Jalen Hurts is there, but still, I don't care.
No, it doesn't matter. Miles Sanders had what, like a shit ton of rushing yards last year. I'm trying to remember what it actually was. Miles Sanders had despite the rushing quarterback Jalen Hurts, 1,269 rushing yards, nice, and not a lot of receiving yards, but he didn't need it. So yeah, look, having a running quarterback does not preclude you from having a ton of rushing yards, especially when you are an elite talent like Jonathan Taylor is, and a presumably, I believe, elite, healthy talent when it's all said and done. So
now my question here for you is, I'm sure we'll ask it again next week as we come up to it. Where are you taking Jonathan Taylor?
Pat, if I'm drafting today, I don't think I am. I think I might be tempted in the third. I'll say that. I think I'd be tempted in the third. I think in fantasy, you are really putting yourself in a tough spot if you don't nail your first two picks with like guaranteed contributors. Whether it's a shoot for the moon type of contributor or a guy that you just know is going to be a solid floor and target monster, you need to get points from those first two picks. Third rounder, I might start to think about it, because then if he does come back and get traded, and then you have, two or maybe three guys on your team who are first round caliber players, then you have a big advantage. And I guess I could stomach, if what's worst case scenario, right? I mean, I'm assuming he's healthy. Worst case scenario is he goes back to the Colts and we just have these kind of little, things popping up throughout the year, whether he's going to sit out and miss a game here and there. But I don't think there's a world where he doesn't play any games this season, because that's not in his best interest to do so. So worst case scenario is he's just, kind of 60-70% of himself and misses some games. But even that, at least you start him when he plays and you get him in the third round. With as good as he is, I think that's worth it in the third. I can deal with it.
Yeah, I think I agree, because you are getting crazy upside in the third round there. You're getting a guy who would have been a first round pick had all these shenanigans not happened, and that outcome could still happen. He could still be a top 5 running back, and you get him in the third round. That's insane value, but. Because I'm picking 12 in our draft, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, he's going to be there, and he's going to be staring me in the face.
He's 100% going to be there. Is the 12-13 turn? Yeah.
I don't think I can do it. I just don't think I can do it.
I mean, that's not where his ADP even is anymore. Like, you're not in the minority for passing up JT at pick 12 and 13. Like, you start, again, I think his ADP or his ranking on ESPN now is around, like, pick 20. So you are getting into the very end of the second round, and I think inevitably you're still going to get some people who are hesitant even at that spot. So I think he probably will fall into the early third a lot, and that is where people will be mostly comfortable with taking him. But I think Just a hunch, Pat. I think JT is going to be one of those guys that at the end of the year, it's like the percentage of fantasy championship teams and the players that rank the most. It's going to be very high for Jonathan Taylor. That's just a hunch. It could go to absolute shit.
If guys
for
are
JT,
getting him in the late second, early third round, and this all kind of materializes, and he's in a reasonable situation, whether it's in Indianapolis or somewhere else, there's going to be a lot of people hitting themselves for not getting him when they might have had 2 or 3 shots at it.
Yeah, it's Pandora's Jonathan Taylor. He is both the best and worst fantasy pick you can make, and you won't know until you pick him. So, again, for us, for those Labor Day weekend and around there drafters, we'll probably have a little more clarity. But, Pat, I feel like I've been coming on this pod and saying that every week for the last several weeks, and we don't have much more.
It's getting worse, honestly. It's getting worse.
He's allowed to seek a trade, so, I guess that is a development. But assuming if he doesn't find one, that's not clarity. So we'll see what ends up happening with Jonathan Taylor and whether he finds a new home or not and whether he ends up being worth a fantasy pick. But he could be very well a league winner or an absolute rock bottom pick in fantasy. Only time will tell. Pat, we got a couple of quarterbacks who have been named starters since the last time we were on this show. Sam Howell and Baker Mayfield, the future QB1 and QB2 overall in fantasy football. Sam Howell, unironically, is a guy that I like. So I want to talk about the fantasy outlook for, not only the quarterbacks, but the offenses surrounding them. With Sam Howell, I view him as, a high upside streamer quarterback, and honestly, a guy that I could see is starting a lot throughout the year. Like, I would not be surprised to see Sam Howell finish as a QB1 in 12-team leagues, as the QB 10, 11, 12. I think the talent's there. Look, that's his ceiling play, right? Like, he's not going to be a guy that's competing for top 5 QB status, but I think this Commanders offense under Eric Bieniemy, with no more Dan Snyder kind of hanging over this franchise like a rain cloud, so much talent around Howell. He has rushing upside, and again, he looked good in that preseason game against the Ravens. Yes, it's preseason, I know, but it's what you want to see if you're going to see anything from Sam Howell in these early stages. So I like Howell, especially if you are a guy who's waiting on quarterback. He plays the Arizona Cardinals week 1. I really don't think he's going to let you down week 1 at least, and then you can go from there. So if you want to play the QB streaming thing, he's a guy that I could see pairing with Anthony Richardson, one of those riskier quarterbacks. And then Baker Mayfield, I personally, I have to say personally as if this is a hot take, he's not going to have any fantasy value himself unless it's in I know, I'm really breaking news here. He's not going to have fantasy value himself unless you are really down bad and he's against like the Rams, whose defense is a bunch of UPS drivers. But I do think this makes me a little more optimistic for 2 players on the Buccaneers, Mike Evans and Rachaad White. Mike Evans is a guy who was actually really good in the first half of last year if you look back at his games, and then just tailed off in the second half. For us non-PPR guys, he was throwing out 5 points, 4 points, 5 basically for the entire second half of the year. And he was
basically unusable
until that very last week where most people probably had him on their benches. I believe he went off for like 210 yards and 3 touchdowns. So if you had him in, congrats to you. But Mike Evans is a guy, look, Baker Mayfield is a very willing and actually accurate downfield passer. He may not do much else very well, but he can throw the ball deep, and the Bucs are probably going to be losing quite a bit because this offense overall will probably not be super great. And then Rachaad White, Baker Mayfield is just one of the more willing and consistent passers to the running back. Running backs, he likes to do a little check down, a little dump off. So Rachaad White, he excels there, and I think that could help him a little bit. But Pat, how do you view each of these quarterback situations now that we have officially named starters?
In Tampa, a lot of the talk this whole offseason has been people being more bullish on Chris Godwin just because of the possibility that Baker Mayfield's under center. Where I'm trying not to compare Baker Mayfield to Tom Brady in any way here, but they both like their slot receivers.
He's way better.
Well, yeah, obviously State Farm. What was he? State Farm Progressive? What the fuck was he?
Progressive. At home with Baker
Those
Mayfield.
commercials were funny. That guy sucks, but those commercials were funny. But he likes throwing to the slot receiver, and Chris Godwin is a great, because he's not your prototypical slot guy. Like, he's a really good athlete. Like, he's a guy who could probably stick it on the outside, but I liked it even before that, just kind of assuming it was going to be Baker. I was always in on Godwin. Evans, I kind of feel the same because, like I said, I've kind of been going this whole offseason assuming it was going to be Baker over Kyle Trask. If you're drafting him outside of your starting lineup, then sure. But I'm not drafting Mike Evans as someone who I'm expecting to be in my lineup at any given time during the season. I just don't love that. And Rachaad White is kind of just that prototypical dead zone running back where it's like, yeah, if you punt the position, he's definitely got his upside. Horribly inefficient last year. He's never really had a huge workload before, and is a very good pass catcher. And who's behind him? Like Sean Tucker, is it behind him? So like there's nothing crazy. There's no Leonard Fournette there that's going to eat a significant amount of carries from him, at least in theory. So again, kind of stand the same on White. Like it's more so just, did you punt running back? You know, are you relying on this dead zone? If you're relying on this dead zone, then he's not the worst guy to have.
Yeah, I think you mentioned Sean Tucker there. I mean, yes, there's not an obvious player to take carries away, but if I draft Rachaad White, sorry for the sirens in the background, I am not leaving my draft without Sean Tucker. It seems like we have an undrafted free agent running back pop up every single year who ends up being fantasy relevant. I've talked about Rachaad White in this vein before, where we don't exactly know how good he is outside of being a pretty good pass catching back. We just haven't really seen it. He was pretty inefficient last year, even though the entire run game was inefficient. So we're kind of in a wait and see on Rachaad White and how good he is. Sean Tucker is a guy who really only went undrafted out of Syracuse because of injury concerns that he has pretty much brushed aside here in the preseason. So I think Sean Tucker is a good back, and he's a guy you can get for free in your drafts, and I would not be surprised at all if we're talking about Sean Tucker as a sort of a flex value guy a couple weeks or a month into the season. So if you draft Rachaad White, draft Sean Tucker, because one of them will be a somewhat consistent fantasy contributor throughout the year. And even though it should be Rachaad off the bat. That's what the rankings say, and that's what all the projections say. But I'm just saying, don't rule out Sean Tucker. That's all.
I don't know if you hear this motherfucker on a motorcycle or driving by on something. Like this dude's got to have the tiniest cock I can imagine in my life. Like this dude, like I could still hear him. He's got to be like a mile down the street, and I can still hear him.
I don't hear him. I don't know if the viewers heard him.
I muted at one point because it was so like when he was right in front of my house, I heard him coming. I'm like, Jesus God. Yeah, we got sirens. We got motorcyclists. What's next? Guys not wearing any pants? But yeah, and in terms of Washington, I'm not quite as in on Sam Howell as you are. Like, is he a streamer? Sure. Mm-hmm. But again, I think it really helps that offense. I love Jahan Dotson. Even with Terry McLaurin out there, Jahan Dotson looked fantastic at the end of the year last year. Yeah. And if Terry is out for any amount of time, oh boy, like, yeah, I really like Dotson, especially considering I'm not worried about Curtis Samuel, I'm not worried about De'Ami Brown, I'm not worried about Logan Thomas or any other tight end. I mean, Antonio Gibson will catch his brother Anthony. Antonio Gibson, I'm sure will catch the ball a little bit, but I'm not that concerned there. I mean, we're looking at a start to the year possibility where Dotson is the number one target there, and even if Terry comes back, he's the number two at worst. But I do think Howell will make this a little more dynamic. We've seen what Jacoby Brissett can do. The guy is probably one of the better backups in the NFL. He's very steady as he goes, but it's nothing that's going to blow your socks off. I think Howell does have that potential.
Yeah, I just think Howell is a pretty well-rounded guy, and I don't know. I think the Commanders are just a team that I'm relatively optimistic for. They're a team that's had a good amount of talent on their defense for a few years, just suffered through injuries, and they're in a tough division. So I mean, I'm not going to go crazy and project a wild card appearance for them, even though the playoffs have expanded to 7 teams over the last couple of years. But I do think they'll be a competitive team, and I think Sam Howell is going to show people that he is. He belongs in this league. I'll say that much. The Commanders may have finally found something that doesn't make them have to start 7 different quarterbacks in a league. That in a season. That's all I'm going to say.
And the thing is, they have to be good too to be competitive in that division. As much as we like to shit on the Cowboys, as fun as it is to shit on the Cowboys and the Giants, they're both going to be solid. And then the Eagles. That's going to be a really, really competitive division, and they're really going to have to play well to hang in there.
Absolutely. Couple other injury notes here. So Devon Achane, a guy I talked up, he is week to week with a shoulder injury. I mentioned it toward the top of the show. He suffered it versus the Texans. Pat, I don't think I could have possibly 180'd anymore on a player since our last show. But look, I still love the talent on the guy, but we cannot have injury issues at this point. He has been operating as essentially the 5th back in these preseason games, which that's not a surprise. You can come back from that, but now you're asking him to not only come back from that, but overcome these injuries. It's a guy that I would not be surprised if he is fantasy relevant around week 8, 9, whatever it is, when he's healthy and one of these guys is Wilson or Mostert or both are hurt. But for now, he's got injury issues of his own, and he's just not. There's better ways to spend late round picks, as much as I hate to say it. And a player of a similar caliber to Devon Achane, Cooper Kupp, is returning to practice this week.
Come on, man.
So Cooper Kupp seems to be like he's going to be all good to go for the start of the season. Just, keep monitoring that. But this is a guy that I think you should have really no issue selecting in the first round of your fantasy draft if you want to take a receiver, and Jefferson and Chase are both gone, because after that I think it's Cooper Kupp's time. I know there's Tyreek Hill people out there. I am not one of them. I'd prefer Cooper Kupp, but that's where I'm at with that. Cooper Kupp looking on track to start the season. Pat, we got some more preseason takeaways. As I do, I want to shout out to PFF Nate Janke on Twitter. He is a guy that just keeps track of all these guys who are playing and snaps, and who's taking the high value snaps and everything you need to know from the preseason. Basically, I highly recommend you read his stuff. If you don't have the PFF subscription, well, I'm not going to tell you to buy it because they're not sponsoring us, but I got it and I like reading his stuff at least, so I could say that. First major preseason takeaway, and this is not something I needed anybody to tell me through diagrams or stats. Darren Waller is him. He's that guy, apparently. He went absolutely nuts. We heard all throughout camp that Daniel Jones loves the guy. He can't stop throwing to him. I turned on that game jokingly expecting to see Jones throw to him every time, and then he threw to him every fucking time. The first 3 plays,
4 targets on 8 routes run or something. That's insane.
The first 3 plays were all Darren Waller targets. I think he caught all of them. One of them may have come loose at the end, but either way, peppered with targets. And it's good to see a visual representation of all of the hype from camp, because you don't always know what to believe, obviously, and you don't want to take camp too seriously, but when it confirms something that you've already been hearing, that's a little different, I feel like. And so it seems like Darren Waller is going to be the guy in this offense.
And he looked good. This isn't a case of where it's just going to be a volume thing like we've heard with guys maybe like James Conner. Because if you're getting peppered with targets and you stink, okay, you've got a decent floor, but he looked good. He was a problem in terms of matchups. These were balls getting thrown slants in the middle of the field where he was just beating whoever they put on him. And, I've been a champion against Darren Waller this year. He's been one of I believe he was my second pick in the bust draft. He was up there for me. And I'm very willing to take the L. I'm not going to yet, but all signs point to that right now, especially since we've seen a little bit of clarity in terms of who's going to be the Giants' starting receivers. It seems like it's Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, and Paris Campbell seem to be their 3 guys, and neither of them scare me very much in terms of Darren Waller. There is a lot of mouths to feed, but I don't think any of those guys are going to emerge as the alpha. If anyone's going to emerge as the alpha in this offense, it is Darren Waller. And I would be very, very happy to be wrong about what I've said all offseason and for him to play well, because I absolutely love the guy. And I wish him the best. But, yeah, it's this could be the first of many very bad takes that I spew on this show here. But the season hasn't even started. I could be a genius, and this just could be an anomaly. But it's not looking great for me.
I think you're a genius, but yeah, Pat. Darren Waller is just a guy on this offense that he's going to get so many high value looks, and I'll move on from Waller for now because he's going to come back up here in a few minutes. That's a little spoiler alert for you guys. We'll move on to a tight end that we all know and love, Kyle Pitts. Pat, he's doing the thing. He's doing the thing I warned everybody about, and I'm at a point where, look, all right, let me explain first what the thing is before I get too much in my own head. Kyle Pitts only had 50% route participation when on the field. And then he came off the field a shit ton. So, several personnel groupings. In 11 personnel, he only played 33% of the snaps. In 12 personnel, he played 100% of the snaps, so 2 tight end sets. 21 personnel, 0% of the snaps. So basically, any time that there was only 1 tight end out there on the field, odds were it wasn't Kyle Pitts. Now, could this just be a preseason rotation kind of thing? Absolutely. Am I going to assume that's all this is after everything I saw last season? No. This is continuing the trend of Arthur Smith just constantly rotating tight ends in and out, and Kyle Pitts, a guy who is the most talented pass catcher on this team, just being off the field more than he should be. And we know that this is going to be a team with a major identity of running the ball this year. And Kyle Pitts, blocking, I don't think he's necessarily bad at block, but that's not what he's there for. So they bring, him out for guys like Michael Pruitt and Jonnu Smith, and that's what happened in the preseason.
Arthur Smith legends.
I know, dude, all the talk of, Kyle Pitts is tight end 7 and he's there because of the talent, and the talent should keep his floor as tight end 7. I don't understand it, because I don't want to sound bitter, But it does feel like unless you owned Pitts last year, you can't fully conceptualize how low his floor is. It was like you just kind of watch from a distance, and now you can write it off after last season if you didn't own him. But I am telling you right now, that motherfucker over there is ass. Sorry for the plain lady impression. That lady had a weird apology on Twitter. But no, Kyle Pitts. Last year. Kyle Pitt? Never mind. Kyle Pitts last year. Oh, God. He was tight end 22 in points per game. Kyle Pitts was tight end 22 in points per game. That's the floor. I don't know how to explain that any further. Like, people act like his floor is because of his talent is like tight end 8 or 9, like a little bit below where he's ranked right now. It's tight end 22. Like, he might not be on the field very often. The floor is that he's useless, and you are drafting him with, I know it's much lower than it was last year, but you're still drafting him with your, 6th round pick, 7th round pick, one of those. Like, it's not a good bet, in my opinion, at all. And the preseason usage is already showing it. So I'm so out on Kyle Pitts.
They took this guy with the 4th overall pick. You don't take a tight end that early in general. Like, how much do you have to be in love with a guy to take him with a 4th overall pick? And then just to not use him. Like, I get that Arthur Smith loves to run the ball. That's okay. There are tons of teams that run the ball and they still pass. They still have fantasy relevant pass catchers. This guy's on the field 50% of the time with the first team. And it's not like they have some other, up-and-coming tight end. These are old geezers like Jonnu Smith and Michael Pruitt. Like, it just blows my mind. I haven't been as strongly out as you have. I just really haven't even considered him.
Yeah.
I mean, at the ADP, like, the only way I would even take him is if I'm looking at it where 11 other guys in my league have taken tight ends and he's somehow still sitting there. I'd consider snagging him and someone else. But you cannot take him at that ADP, and everyone's going to be like, oh, Bran, it's going to be so funny when you're finally wrong. And it's like, maybe you will, but think about it. I would rather be wrong about this. I would rather play it safe and not take him and be like, oh, man, he finally went off and I was wrong, rather than say, oh, this is the year, and take him as tight end 6 or 7 and then just feel like a fucking idiot with egg on your face for the 3rd year in a row. I mean, granted, he was pretty good the first year, just didn't have the touchdowns, but for really the 2nd year in a row now, to say like, oh yeah, this is his breakout, and then for it not to be, and to use reasonable capital on that, no way. You can't do that. I can't do that.
No, and again, to draft a guy who I've talked about before, his situation has not changed that much from last year. And like, if you draft this guy and the same exact thing happens, you are going to feel like the dumbest motherfucker alive. Like, you're going to be like, I should have seen this coming. And instead, you're blinded by the ceiling of what a great talent he is, and that I still believe he is. None of this is ever personal against Kyle Pitts. I don't think he's a bad player, but I just don't understand the drafting. The only thing I can say in defense of the Falcons, Pat, and taking him at the number 4 pick and then not using him enough, they couldn't see the future of what their quarterback position looked like. They drafted him when they had Matt Ryan. Obviously, we knew his career was coming to an end to an extent. He wasn't going to be there much longer than 1 year, if at all. But I don't think they quite knew that their quarterback situation was going to be this bleak the following 2 years either. I don't think they expected to end up stuck with Marcus Mariota, who was maybe the worst passer in football last year, only to be followed up by Desmond Ridder, who we don't know if he's going to be any better either. We know the Falcons pursued Deshaun Watson at one point, and I think if they had Deshaun Watson, this would probably be a much different story about Kyle Pitts. But they don't, and pursuing Deshaun Watson is kind of what bullied Matt Ryan out of the building, and now they have Desmond Ridder. Desmond Ridder has looked a little bit better. We'll see if it translates to anything for Pitts, but I still just don't think it's a good bet because, again, even if he's a little bit better than Mariota, it doesn't necessarily translate to good fantasy production. Pat, another preseason takeaway here at the running back position, Dameon Pierce. Now, this is a guy that I've been mostly out on up to this point, and not that this changes everything. It's kind of what happened here also led me to research a little more about Dameon Pierce in the situation, but this was a good sign. Dameon Pierce played every snap of the Texans' first 2 drives. Singletary came on for the third drive, and as you noted here, Pierce also ran several routes. He wasn't really noted as a pass catcher last year, but Dameon Pierce, I was kind of out on him because of a suspect O-line. Well, take a second look. That O-line's actually not all that bad and could be pretty decently, overperforming this year. Dameon Pierce, I think, is just your prototypical 4th round RB2 target, and I think he's awesome in that role. But yeah, this was great to see for anybody that was worried about Devin Singletary and what his role might be. It seems like he's just a firm backup and will take, of course, going to take snaps and take a drive or two here and there. But it seems like Pierce, you don't have to be as worried about his workload as maybe we once thought.
Yeah, it was a little bit of Devin Singletary, but it was also just the fact of his, that he commands the volume last year. You go on any fantasy site, and all it talks about is he needed to have literally like 20 touches basically to do something. I think the number was I feel like the number was like 12 touches or more, something like that. But it was drastic. It was drastic.
I think I know how to find it. The workload was definitely the concern with him, and
then obviously also the fact that the Texans are probably still not going to be very good. And, they're going to be losing a lot. He may not. They may not have the game script to get the touches he needs to produce. But maybe he'll improve on that. Maybe he'll catch the ball more. That'll be better touches, and that could help in garbage time. But I'm still kind of hesitant for those reasons. But I mean, again, same thing with Waller. He's showing us that like, hey, maybe we're off here. Maybe we're not onto something here.
Yeah, here is the stat you were referring to. Dameon Pierce averaged just 8.7 fantasy points when he saw under 20 touches. That would have made him the RB. That would have made him the RB 40 in points per game. Look, a lot of that is also situational. I mean, could be circumstantial and just coincidence of those games he didn't break off anything big or whatever. I don't put crazy amount of stock in that, but obviously, look, more volume is better. I don't think I'm breaking any news with that one. So if Dameon Pierce is going to be the clear lead. Yeah, if he's going to be the clear lead 3-down back and Singletary is just kind of going to be sprinkled in here, I'm back in on Dameon Pierce as a guy who typically has a big gaping hole at RB2 by 4th round. He's a guy I'll absolutely be considering there among a couple of other names. And then Khalil Herbert resting with the starters, and it looks like Roschon Johnson is potentially going to be the change of pace back here after kind of ascending and getting some first-team reps in practice. Pat, what do you feel that this means for this backfield overall?
I will say, too, is that, Foreman was out there with the firsts over Johnson, but Johnson was in there on passing down plays. He's gotten more first-down work than Foreman in practice. I think basically, it means that Khalil Herbert is the top guy in this. Like, we thought this was going to be a really muddy backfield, and I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. Obviously, Johnson will get some third down work, and Foreman will get some work. If he doesn't get cut, like, I think at this point, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to see him get cut. I guess, will we know all the cuts next week? I don't think we will.
I don't know when the cut date is. I probably should, because it's got to be.
Because it's just one day this year, which is insane.
That's right. Oh, my God. I forgot they made it. So it's just you cut,
Brandon. 4 p.m. next Tuesday. So we're going to have a hell of a lot to talk about next week.
Folks, tune in next Tuesday. That's all I can tell you.
Oh, shit. Am I going to be working? I'm going to probably have to work that now, don't I?
You're going to have to be updating the
dude, that's what I did in the last cut. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm working. Yep, awesome. All right, cool.
Okay. We'll let you guys know when next week's show is. Pat,
it'll be 7:30.
What you do? You want to tell the people what you do exactly? So
I'll just dox myself. Yeah, I work for ESPN Stats and Analysis. And like basically a lot of stuff that I do is like roster and schedule work. So like for the last 3 years, I've worked the final roster cut down day. And it was insane. It was an insane day. But now that they're only having one cut down, it is going to be literal mayhem. Yeah. And I'm still here for it, but that's what I do, doxing myself. All hail Mickey Mouse. I don't care if anyone hears this from there. Come get me. But
there's nothing illegal about doing a little podcast in your free time. I think people find that interesting. So
nothing illegal about kissing the fellas, but so that's what I do. So that's why now I'm dreading that. So I'm gonna work my dick and nuts off, and then I'm gonna come here and talk with you guys, which will make my day significantly better. But yeah, we're going to have a lot to talk about the cut-down day. But back to Deontay Foreman. I wouldn't be shocked. I don't think he's like the most obvious kind of surprise cut. I'd think that would be more like Damian Harris or Rashad Penny or kind of these more like high-profile names that might get cut. But I wouldn't put it past it if Foreman did get let go. But yeah, I just think mostly that this is Khalil Herbert's backfield. And I was kind of in on him as the guy beforehand, and I drafted him in a dynasty startup, and I'm very, very happy about that. And that, that's looking better and better by the day.
Khalil Herbert's backfield until it becomes Jonathan Taylor's backfield. No, I'm kidding. I agree with you. I like Khalil Herbert at cost still as well. And then, look, it's another case where Pat, I'm a believer in handcuffing running backs as long as you know who to do that with. Like, you don't just – like Joe Mixon, I don't know that he really has a handcuff. I know I've talked about Chase Brown in this podcast, but Chris Evans is going to be a passing down guy. If you can handcuff a guy, though, I think it's worth it. And Roschon Johnson may be that guy. He's at least the ascending player in this backfield versus a guy like Foreman where you know what he is. And Roschon's a guy that I wouldn't have minded taking a lottery ticket flyer on, whether I had Khalil Herbert or not. But if I take Herbert...
Would much rather take
absolutely.
that on Johnson than Foreman, easily.
Yes, absolutely. So I think it's a pairing that makes sense. And, if you are a believer in Roschon Johnson's talent, which I know many are, then, the Herbert-Johnson combo is not bad because I don't really think there's a world where Deonta Foreman becomes like the unquestioned back in this backfield. If you want to be safe, just grab Herbert and Roschon, and you should be good to go. All right, Pat, the moment we've all been waiting for. The My Guys segment. These are the players that we believe so strongly in. As the fantasy footballers would say, we are planting our flag. We are attaching our name to these guys because we believe so strongly in them. And
I'm so sorry to the following 4 people.
Some names you guys may be very much expecting, and some may catch you by surprise. Pat, I feel like we should just alternate position. So
Absolutely.
I'll give my quarterback, you give your quarterback. I'm going to start with a quarterback that we talked a good amount about last week, and I'll be bringing up some of those stats again. But Pat, I toyed with a few candidates here. My quarterback, my guy, or Bran's boy, is Anthony Richardson. The more I thought about it, despite all the risks that may be there, I just think so much lines up for Anthony Richardson to have an effective and successful rookie season with any bumps that may come, but I think there may be less bumps than a lot of people expect. So let's take it, line by line here with Anthony Richardson. Rushing quarterbacks are still the biggest cheat code in fantasy football. It is to the point where I believe something will change in fantasy default settings in the next 5 years to rushing quarterbacks. I believe that they may make it where it's the same as passing yardage, where they only get a point for every 25 yards, because it's at a point where rushing quarterbacks can be bad and get you a ton of fantasy points, like bad in real life and get you a ton of fantasy points. And I think eventually that will correct. People will be like, this seems silly. Because look, Anthony Richardson could have a bad overall year. I don't think the Colts are going to win more than like 4 games this year, but Anthony Richardson can still very well be a great fantasy asset. The Indianapolis Colts have the projected PFF number 10 O-line, so decent enough O-line in front of Anthony Richardson, led by Quentin Nelson, who did take a bit of a step back last year, but we still believe in the talent. Then you've got the Shane Steichen factor. We talked about last week, Shane Steichen has fully committed to Anthony Richardson, saying he will not be pulled due to poor play. This is not a situation where, Gardner Minshew, of all people, is going to be breathing down his neck if he throws a couple of bad picks in the first half. Anthony Richardson is going to have the full game to rack up any points that he may get, and rather than just stick you with, 2 points in the first half and then he gets pulled. Now, he's going to have the full game to work things out. Steichen, more importantly, I believe, has been a quarterback whisperer. He was the OC and play caller for Justin Herbert's Rookie of the Year season in 2020, where he was the QB2 in both total points and points per game. And he was Jalen Hurts' OC and play caller in 2021 and 2022, when he was the QB6 and QB3 in points per game. So you have the worst quarterback season that he has called plays for in the last several years has been Jalen Hurts in 2021 as the QB6. Again, we brought up this as comps, rookies, rookie running quarterbacks over the last few years. Jalen Hurts as a rookie in 2020, his QB finishes were QB 13, QB 1, and QB 12 in the 3 games that he started and finished after taking over for Carson Wentz. So worst finish there was QB 13, and then there's QB 1 upside. Lamar Jackson as a rookie in 2018 after taking over for Joe Flacco averaged 18.6 points per game, QB 13 in points per game. So look, I think we're looking at a reasonable floor as long as Anthony Richardson starts the whole year. Like QB 13 is the bottom barrel result, right? And if you're drafting a quarterback that late, you're drafting him as probably, if you want to be safe, you're drafting him as probably QB 10 or QB 11. It's not like the floor is very far below that. And then Richardson, this is not a player that I'm worried about making so many dumb mistakes that it's going to kill you. He's been described as a very smart player, which means he could develop pretty quick. Like, he's going to probably understand this playbook and develop into a effective NFL quarterback with decent decision-making sooner than later, I believe. And he's not a guy who, like in college, just relied on being stronger and faster than everyone. But the good thing is he is stronger and faster than everyone. He is 6'4", 244, and ran a 4.43 40-yard dash. So for comparison, again, we'll go back to Lamar and Jalen Hurts. Lamar, 6'2", 214, so shorter and lighter, but did run a 4.34. That was at his pro day, though, and you expect him to be a little bit faster given the size. But then Jalen Hurts, 6'1", 223 with a 4.59. So Anthony Richardson is taller, bulkier, and faster than a guy like Jalen Hurts, who has been the best rushing quarterback over the last 2 seasons. I just think all of the formula, all of the ingredients are there, that even with the risk of he's a rookie, I just have no reason to believe that he won't be successful this year. So I am going with Anthony Richardson as my guy, and I firmly believe if you miss out on the top, let's call him 8 quarterbacks, stopping at Trevor Lawrence, this is a guy that will not let you down, I don't believe. And he has top 5 quarterback upside.
Yeah, and I think, again, comparing him to someone last year, I think the easiest comp is Justin Fields in the sense that Fields was pretty bad last year in terms of throwing the ball. There was a lot to be desired as a pass thrower. But the dude just did so much with his legs. And that was while being held back for a good portion of the season. They're not going to hold Anthony Richardson back, let alone in terms of like the possibility of him being pulled, but also just like you said, the fact about Shane Steichen, like he has all of the, he has everything he needs to succeed right now. Again, I don't know if it actually happens. Like you said, they're going to lose a lot. He could be really bad. He's going to have some really bad games, and the thing though is you just can't have that. You can't have your quarterback going for 5 points in a week, but then he's going to have weeks where he wins your matchup single-handedly. But again, I'm still not going to. If I miss out on the top 8 quarterbacks, I'm going with Pat's pal Tua Tagovailoa, who I've talked about multiple times here. Not only do I think is he the guy to go to outside of that top 8, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in the top 8 or even higher. It's always the whole meme where it's, his brains are made of scrambled eggs and everything and this. And yeah, and that's a huge concern, but and you could take risk into it with everything, but it's like you can't go into a season saying this guy is going to get hurt again. And if he does not get hurt last year, first of all, he was QB 15 last year in 13 games. He missed 4 games and was still almost a QB1. And even from a non-fantasy perspective, he led the NFL in passer rating, yards per attempt, and touchdown percentage. And he had a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. The guy was absolutely balling out. And he's got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, who I think is the most dynamic wide receiver duo in the league. By a decent margin even. And you look like, oh, well, he doesn't have anyone besides them. Who cares? You don't need anybody else. You don't need anybody else with those two. And in Mike McDaniel's offense, we've seen it with Jimmy Garoppolo and other things in San Francisco. You don't need to be a stud to succeed football-wise and fantasy-wise, but Tua goes beyond that. We're forgetting how good this guy was in college, and then he showed that last year that he could still perform at that level. Again, the only real knock I have on him is the health. But at this point, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I'm scared he's going to get his head knocked off his shoulders, so I'm not going to pick him. No, I'm going to go into it assuming this guy's going to play all 17 games. And Fantasy Pros consensus ADP is QB 11. I think that's wild. I think that's wildly low for Tua, who, would have easily been higher than that last year had he played out the year. So I love this Dolphins offense. Give me as many pieces of, 3. Of the 3, give me all 3 of the pieces of the Dolphins offense. But I want them, and I think it's going to lead to just an absolute rocket launch for Tua.
Fair enough. Tua's a guy that I have not been in on whatsoever, but I look at his numbers and I definitely see the argument. The concern to me is that, later in the season, and you could argue that this was part of, coming back from the injury, to close out the season, he was, I guess, mid is probably the way to call it, mid to below average. So the point total from week 12 versus Houston through week 16 against Green Bay, we had 15, 13, 11.8, 17.7, and 10. So, really only the 17.7 is going to be one where you're decently happy with, and even that's on the lower end of the point totals. But you do have this middle season stretch where he had 28.9, 24, and 23, and I think that's kind of what you're hoping continues.
And you could also argue in that stretch, he may not have been right. This was post that first concussion,
exactly.
Correct? Yeah, there's a chance that he may not have even been right. I mean, he had that was one of the more severe ones that I can even remember, and they kept him in the game.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, you could, maybe you could say that he wasn't right, but we'll see. But if he is truly at full health, I think we're going to see more of the guy that's dropping 20-plus points every week rather than someone who's kind of going to be like, but also you're at the point where, you're taking a guy later. You could get him at QB 9, 10, 11. You can take someone else if you'd like. If you're really that scared of the health, take Kirk Cousins, take Jared Goff, take Geno Smith. Do that, but I don't think you're going to need to. If I'm drafting Tua, I'm good with it. I'm not going to necessarily waste a pick on another quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've said it before, I'll say it again. You could have a jugs machine that's throwing to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and it would probably put up a decent amount of fantasy points. So Tua is a guy that I don't know how much I believe in the talent, but I believe in him being good enough and throwing to incredible weapons that I could see him as a starter. Not a guy I'll be targeting, but hope maybe I'll eat my words when I face you in fantasy this year, because I think you're probably just going to end up with Tua in our league, to be honest. That would be my prediction. If you like him this much, I can't imagine there's too many people in our league that like him more than you do. So,
well, again, if it gets past that top echelon or even the top two echelons, then yeah, I probably will. But I may take one of the top dogs. You don't know. Who knows? No one knows. God knows. But Tua's kind of a later guy, but now I'm going to a first-round pick here for my pal at running back. And I mentioned him. I think one of the first podcasts I did, one of the questions was most underrated running back in the league, and I said Tony Pollard. I have been a huge advocate of Tony Pollard all offseason. I still am. You look at what he did with Ezekiel Elliott last year. He had over 1,000 yards rushing and 9 touchdowns, and that was with Zeke. Zeke averaged 16.4 touches a game last year and stunk it up.
Doesn't feel like that.
And that's the thing that I don't think people realize. Just because he was that bad and Pollard was that good, you think, Pollard was dominating the touches. It was a really even split, and all of those touches are up for grabs. And another kind of takeaway from the preseason, Deuce Vaughn has not been a factor. Deuce Vaughn's coming in after Malik Davis and Rico Dowdle. And then you still got the ghost of Ronald Jones there. I don't see any of those guys. I mean, it's not like Pollard's going to get every single touch every game, of course, but no one is going to cut into his playing work significantly. Like, if you say there are 16 touches up for grabs, I think it's fair to say that Pollard's going to get 9 or 10 of those. He could very easily get 9 or 10 of those a game just from the lack of competition. If they had gone out and brought Zeke back or brought in Kareem Hunt or Leonard Fournette or whoever, then I'd be like, I'd be a little more concerned. But there's just nobody there. And this is a guy who can catch the ball well. Out of all qualified, running backs, he was second in the league in yards per reception. Only Derrick Henry had more, because Derrick Henry doesn't catch the ball, but when he does, he runs for 70 yards each time. But Pollard, but he could realistically be the every down back there. And again, this guy is a slam dunk, our top 12 running back. And especially in non-PPR leagues, I believe ESPN has him projecting as a second rounder, which is insane to me, especially non-PPR. But non-PPR or PPR, I think Justin, God, I'm a mess. Tony Pollard is a great pick in your first round, especially non-PPR if you are a fucking dinosaur like us and still do it. But all aboard. And I'll spoil it right now. If I had to pick my number one pal, it is Tony Pollard. I am all in on Tony Pollard.
This dinosaur right here, if our draft falls a certain way, is planning to take Tony Pollard in the first round. So I'm taking a running back, and it's just he's kind of one of the guys that I'm thinking about. Hard to gauge what everybody in front of me is going to do from the 7 spot, but if it falls a certain way, Tony Pollard very well may be my first round pick, and I'll feel okay about it. Yeah, you mentioned those touches per game for Zeke, just to put a total on it and make it a bigger number and maybe make people realize Zeke is freeing up 231 carries, just carries, 231. So Tony Pollard, for a guy that was already so good last year, missing out on all of those 231 carries, if he gets half of those or more than half of those, which is more than reasonable, yeah, I mean, Tony Pollard to the moon. I agree with you. The question, I guess, is just durability, because it's going to be his first time handling a workload like that. But I don't think there's any other concerns, really. The O-line is good. He's probably going to get the goal line stuff. I mean,
that's the thing, too. Zeke was Dowdle. That's what Zeke was taking.
Zeke was the goal line guy.
That's what Zeke was taking.
Zeke was the goal line guy.
Also, this Mike McCarthy malarkey of saying, we're going to run. I don't truly believe that, but, if they're going to run the ball more, Geez, great. I think
Right.
everything is aligning right now for Tony Pollard.
Yeah, and I do think Deuce Vaughn will play a role, on these passing downs. I mean, we've seen some of these clips where he's been one of the more electric players in the few times he has been on the field in this preseason. Whether that results in regular season volume, we will have to wait and see. I know people want to get carried away because he's fun and tiny and pocket size, but we will have to wait on that one. The Brand's boy for the running back position is Ramondre Stevenson. It's
biased.
About again a little bit last week. Yeah, I do have a Ramondre jersey about arm's length from me, but I'm not going to grab that right now. Look, Ramondre is a guy that I think people have just kind of jumped off the train a little bit too much because of the Zeke signing. So last year, Ramondre was PPR RB7, despite only having 210 carries, 5 rushing touchdowns, and 3 receiving touchdowns. So look, even with a guy like Zeke around, who is likely going to take more than the 3 touchdowns that Damian Harris accounted for last year, I think the difference there can be made up by just this offense being better. Like, everybody expects this offense to be better. So I expect there to be more scoring opportunities to go around in general. That meaning that Ramondre getting 8 touchdowns while Zeke gets, also 8 or 9 touchdowns. I mean, 17 touchdowns from backfield is pretty normal. Jamal Williams had 17 on his own last year. So I think this team is going to really kind of lean on that run game, even though the pass game will be better. They've been running RPOs at a much higher rate as well, which should open up the run game just a bit. It's just not a guy who needs to worry that much about the volume that Zeke is going to take. I think you take a guy like Ramondre Stevenson, and it's just a bet on the talent. Like, the guy that he is now going around in, we'll look at ESPN leagues, Kenneth Walker is a talented back, but then you start to get into that territory of guys who are just not as talented. Like Miles Sanders, I think Ramondre Stevenson is a much more talented back than Miles Sanders.
By a lot.
Right, by a lot. And I think, Ramondre versus like Dameon Pierce does become a question, but I think Ramondre might be a little more well-rounded overall than Dameon Pierce is. It's just a guy that if you are going into the 4th round and taking a running back who for a fact is just an above-average talent at the position and is still going to be the lead back on his team, and now you can get him at a point where he's going to be your RB2, I feel really good about that. On Fantasy Pros, he is the number 30 overall pick, so not as aggressive, or excuse me, that's in standard, maybe PPR is even higher, so not as aggressive of a correction there just yet. But if he keeps falling because people are terrified of Zeke, I just say smash that draft button on Ramondre Stevenson, because he's a damn good player on an offense that's going to be much improved this year. I don't see a reason why he can't. This is kind of the Pollard argument again. I don't see a reason why he shouldn't at least reach what he did last year, maybe minus a few receptions that made him comfortably a top 10 back. He was RB7. Even if he finishes as RB10, you are thrilled with that in the 4th round.
Oh yeah, and he like those guys who said, I think he's got way more upside. And I mean, have we seen Zeke? Like, I know the term is feed Zeke,
That's
but
been
like
the reports.
He's large. Like, that is a large man.
Large. Fat boy. Yeah, he's a big boy.
Like, are we that scared of him? Like, here's the thing: unfortunately, he's going to hit Ramondre where it hurts, because he's going to steal touchdowns. That's where it's going to hurt Ramondre the most. But we're looking at it, if Zeke is completely washed, we're looking at a situation where Ramondre is still the overwhelmingly lead back, and I think that's going to be the case anyway. In the 4th round, I think he's by far going to have the highest ceiling of any running backs you're taking in that range.
Yeah, I mean, look, you strip away a few of the targets, because I do think that part of his game went overboard last year just because of the offensive struggles. It was just, when in doubt, throw it to Ramondre and hope he makes something happen. But it's going to be a case where maybe lack of target volume is replaced by quality of targets that he's going to get. I just think Bill O'Brien is going to solve a lot of things for this offense, and even if Zeke comes in and takes a bunch of touchdowns, Ramondre Stevenson, I mean, he is RB, what is he on Fantasy Pros? He is RB still 10. So, I mean, look, I would take him there, but he's falling further than that on other platforms, I know for a fact. I just think he's going to be a guy who's going to be at least top 12 this year, and I'm confident in that. So don't be afraid of Ramondre. I will move to my receiver here, Pat, and it is George Pickens. George Pickens is my guy. We've brought him up a couple times. So, look, there's been the propaganda on George Pickens. I mean, Ryan Clark came out and said that he's more talented than Justin Jefferson, which
Cap.
Look, as much as I'm gonna get on the Pickens train here, I am not going to say that much. But I do think he is a crazy talented guy who could be sort of the biggest breakout receiver of this year. I think he sort of fell by the wayside, behind guys like. I think there's a little more hype for guys like Jahan Dotson, and then obviously the guys who are way above him, like Garrett Wilson, who are like confirmed. We're banking on it breakouts. With the Steelers just kind of being little boring on offense last year because of Kenny Pickett not being great. I think Pickens maybe is a bit of an afterthought compared to the other guys, but he should not be. I think Pickett's going to take that leap this year, and this was an interesting note from NFL Live. So Kenny Pickett to George Pickens last year yielded the highest QBR for any quarterback pass catcher combination with a minimum of 50 targets. So the caveat here is they did have a lot less targets than the guys who are, behind them on this list. And the more targets that you get or that get thrown as receivers' way, it's probably going to bring this number down just due to, statistics in general. And if this QBR is that high, it could be a matter of Pickett only being very selective and making sure it was going to be a completion whenever he threw to George Pickens. God, this Pickens thing is going to be a bitch. But the guys behind them
for a great t-shirt.
It's true. The guys behind them in that statistic. So highest QBR again for any quarterback pass catcher combination. Second was Tua and Jalen Waddle with 88 targets and a 96 QBR. Geno Smith and Tyler Lockett, 116 targets with a 94 QBR, and Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, 104 targets, 93 QBR. Pickett and Pickens were 58 targets, 98 QBR. So, you look at those other combinations. I mean, those are Lockett, again, I'm a little bit off, but last year, those were Lockett in like stud receivers. And I think George Pickens can enter that conversation. The narrative for him coming out of camp and these preseason games has been that he's expanded his route tree, and that's been the biggest question mark of his game. He doesn't get separation. He just kind of is a go up and get the ball guy, which he does better than 99% of the guys in the NFL. He's an absolute freak. If this route tree expansion narrative is true, George Pickens can be a wide receiver 1 this year. Even if it's not true, George Pickens can be a Mike Williams type, because I think Kenny Pickett is going to ascend to a point where he can support receivers over the course of a full season. It's not going to be 7 passing touchdowns over the course of whatever games he start like. I don't remember how many games he started last. He averaged barely a touchdown per game. Oh God, he averaged barely a touchdown per game last year. I think that's going to change drastically. Everything coming out of Steelers camp is that Kenny Pickett looks good. So I think just the stars are aligning for Pickens. The one thing I'm hesitant about is if the route tree thing is true. I don't know. We haven't really seen it in action. One guy on Twitter that I follow did note that, as much as that has been the narrative, he did run mostly go routes in his preseason snaps. So nothing changed there. But maybe they don't want to give away the secrets. I'm betting on the talent again here, and it's a guy that, I don't want to chase crazy upside with a low floor in the early rounds, but George Pickens is a guy that if I could get him, and based on his ADP, you can in late 6th, early 7th, even 8th round if people don't want him. This is a guy that he's so good, man. He's just such a talented guy, and if he can round out his game, he can definitely ascend to that next level.
And if you draft him, you can name your team Slim Pickens. For those of you out there.
That's a good point.
Yeah, see, we could get. Oh, that's what we should do. We should do some names one of these weeks. We've only got one more. We've only got 2 more podcasts before the season starts. Holy shit! God. Oh my God. I'm gonna go with a second-year wide receiver as well. Probably a little more boring than George Pickens, and I've brought him up. God, I think I bring him up every podcast at this point. So stop me if you've heard me. Chris Olave. He did not get the fanfare that Garrett Wilson got last year, rightfully so. Garrett Wilson was an absolute stud. He is just a better football player. But Olave was like an advanced metrics darling last year. He was 8th in total air yards. He was 10th in yards per route run. And this was all with a 26.7% target share. And this was all with fucking Andy Dalton, who is awful.
Red Rocket.
He is just awful at this point in his at this point in his career. And you're getting Derek Carr, granted, again, I may be a little biased, but Derek Carr's nothing special. But you cannot look me in the eye and tell me that is not an upgrade over Andy Dalton. And the biggest thing is that he's going to throw the ball deep. And Chris Olave could be the guy that benefits the most from that. And I think we're going to see a step up in all this. And the biggest thing And again, I'm just going to say I'm not very concerned about Michael Thomas just because of all the injuries. You know, I said like, oh, you can't bank on Tua getting injured. And you can't bank on Michael Thomas getting injured either, but it's not to say that he won't be on the field. It's has these injuries slowed him down? It's been a long time. It was pre-COVID. I think that's the best way to kind of, make an era of things. It was pre-COVID since the last time that we really saw him be the dominant guy that he is. Sure, he's going to cut some into it, but there's so few wide receivers who are the only guy that's going to be getting something. But I don't see Thomas getting in Olave's way of being the wide receiver one in that offense, and it's an offense that might be decent actually. They've got some good pieces here. But yeah, and again, Olave is a guy that is not going to be as expensive as is a guy like Garrett Wilson. I think he's a high-end wide receiver too, which it's still pretty rich. Don't get me wrong, but I think that it's worthy of that, and I would not be surprised at all if we're looking at the end of the year that Chris Olave is a top 12 wide receiver at the end of the year. And another thing too about him, he didn't catch touchdowns. He didn't get red zone targets. And you could say oh, Jawan Johnson's just going to be more of this, Michael Thomas this, more of that, and it goes. And sure, yes, they're there again, but I think positive touchdown regression is absolutely in order here for Chris Olave.
Yeah, I think the offense as a whole is going to be better, like you said. Looking at their first preseason game against the Chiefs, their starters only played for, I want to say, 1, maybe 2 drives, but it was very smooth. I tweeted about it that, up until this Ravens Commanders debacle, that was the most that it felt like real football thus far, because it was the starters for the Saints. They looked really good, and it was a smooth drive. I think this offense is going to take a big step forward with Derek Carr, and Chris Olave is going to be at the forefront of that. I am, as you know, a bit of a Michael Thomas proponent, but that's not because I think he's going to be the team's wide receiver one or even remotely get the same value of targets and amount of targets that Chris Olave is. This is Chris Olave's receiver room. No question about it. It's just, can he get those touchdowns up? I think so. And Chris Olave is one of my favorite, receiver targets this year. It's just in our league, Pat, he's not a guy that I've been able to get because I don't get him in the 3rd round, and there's just slightly better options available to me in the 2nd. But Chris Olave, a guy whose talent, I absolutely believe in.
And to round out my team, how could it be Pat's pals without Pat himself, Pat Freiermuth? He's one of the names that whenever we talk tight ends, I always say there's a couple guys towards the end of the tight end one spectrum that I think are great values, and it's the Muth. He is that guy. I honestly think he's got one of the more solid floors in fantasy football, especially in PPR. Non-PPR gets a little tough because he doesn't score a lot of touchdowns. I think he only had 2 or 3 touchdowns last year. So that becomes a problem in non-PPR scoring. But him and Kenny Pickett loved that guy. And I believe he was the 2nd most targeted guy behind Deontay Johnson last year when Pickett was under center. But you look at it, even though Pickett's gonna get better, that's still the security blanket kind of guy. You've got George Pickens, who's this freak athlete going to make these big plays. If a play breaks down or something, Freiermuth's going to be there, and he's going to be a target monster, and he's going to be a catch monster. And again, you're banking on some positive touchdown regression, but I don't think that's too far of a stretch to do. And the other thing, another preseason note, was that this past week, he ran a route on 100% of the Steelers' passing plays. The guy does not block. Even last year, he ran routes on over 80% of Steelers' passing plays. He does not block. He is a pass-catching tight end. And you're looking at a situation where he is the number 3. They always need to say you need to be a top 2 thing to be an elite tight end. I'm not sitting here saying Pat Freiermuth's going to be an elite tight end, but he's going on Fantasy Pros, I believe, tight end 9, and he's going in round 8. That's a fantastic value. If you miss on Travis Kelce, if you miss on Mark Andrews, if you don't want to pay up for that kind of value for guys like TJ Hawkinson, George Kittle, God forbid Kyle Pitts, Freiermuth is the perfect pick. You can load up in the first 6-7 rounds and then get a super dependable tight end really late. And again, we're banking on Pittsburgh being better this year. So much of that, we got in the chat here. Imagine if the Steelers had a real OC. Yeah, Matt Canada, not good. But I think we see steps forward, and I think I could easily see George Pickens reaping the benefits. I think we're going to see Deontay Johnson find the end zone a couple fucking times. And I think we're going to see another really solid year for Pat Freiermuth, who is going on year 3, and he's just been really solid his whole career.
Freiermuth is a guy that I do really like the talent, and again, he's going to be a beneficiary of the Pickett step forward that I believe is going to happen. I am just a little bit worried about the upside when you do have guys like Deontay and Pickens there taking so many of the targets. I would aim a little higher upside-wise with the tight ends because we know what a desolate fucking wasteland tight end becomes other than the top few guys. So I would aim a little higher with the ceiling, but I do totally understand the floor that is in theory there with Pat Freiermuth. Just got to hope that Darnell Washington doesn't dip into the touchdowns there because it seems like that's been the report out of him from camp is that the Georgia product who slipped in the draft quite a bit due to injury concerns, the one thing he's been doing is catching a shit ton of touchdowns. So we need, if there's going to be, more touchdowns in the Steelers offense, we need them to go to Pat Freiermuth if he's going to return that value. But I could see it. Look, I'm excited for the Steelers as a whole, so I'm excited that you got a Steeler on your list, and I agree with you. I'm not going to have a ton to say about the Brands boy at tight end because I talked about him already, but it is Darren Waller. And the reason I have it as Darren Waller is because what we've seen in the preseason, all these reports, he has a chance to be tight end 2 or even tight end 1 with how much he's going to be targeted. Like that is within his range of outcomes, where I don't necessarily think that's within the range of outcomes of like Dallas Goedert. Like Dallas Goedert's not going to be tight end 1 unless AJ Brown and Devonta Smith both fuck off to Never Land. Like Darren Waller is the number 1 target on this team. He is going to command targets in every situation. I mean, he's going to be the go-to guy in that pass game. You need a first down in a clutch situation, like it's going to be Darren Waller. You absolutely need to score and you're calling a pass play. Like you're looking at least Darren Waller first. So they haven't had an alpha receiver like that they've been able to, operate with since Daniel Jones has been a Giant. So I think Darren Waller, there's a reason Daniel Jones has been targeting him so much. He may throw him the ball 7,000 fucking times this year. Like he's going to be the guy. I just think if you are getting him right now, he's going in like the 6th round, 5th round, somewhere around there. Look, I would not blame you if you spent a 4th on him just to make sure that you get him because I don't think that's a bad spot to take him. If Mark Andrews is going in, the 3rd or early 4th round, I see no reason that Darren Waller shouldn't go shortly after him. You can play that game of chicken as much as you want to in your draft because of where his ADP is. That's totally up to you. But the value that I think he could return is that of a 2nd round pick. So, if you want to spend a 4th just to ensure that you get him, I think that is fair. Darren Waller is, quite possibly headed for a career year as just the only guy that the Giants throw the ball to at all. So that'll conclude it for our My Guys segment here. Mine, to sum it up, were Anthony Richardson, Ramondre Stevenson, George Pickens, and Darren Waller. Pat's pals are Tua Tagovailoa, Tony Pollard, Chris Olave, and Pat Freiermuth. Draft all 8 of these guys, and you will be playing fantasy football. I'm not going to say you'll go undefeated or anything. I don't know.
I mean, if you get all 8 of these guys, then yeah, you might.
Yeah. I mean, is that even possible? Like, what could you do here? I don't think we have. I guess we have Tony in the 1st, Olave in the 2nd, Ramondre in the 3rd. Yeah, you could draft this team. Ramondre in the 3rd, Waller in the 4th. I mean, yeah, you could totally draft this team. So, look, Pat, maybe we'll have to do that. Just make like an ESPN public league and just draft this team and just kind of let it rock and see what happens. Just the Brands boys and Pat's pals. We'll have to find a kicker and defense, I guess, but whatever, we can figure that out. We will close out the show as we always do with our viewer questions. And real quick,
we just got a letter. We just got a letter. We just got a letter. Wonder who it's from.
Suck my ass. Oh.
That's not how it goes. We're closing out with our viewer questions. Thank you for the mail, the questions, as always. So we've only got 2 this week, but I thought they were pretty good questions. This one coming from Zach on YouTube. He says, who's next up in Indy, and what do you think their value would be this season when/if JT is traded? Pat, I heard Matthew Berry say that he's like, if JT gets traded, whoever the Colts running back is going to be is probably not on the roster right now. And I think
100% agree.
Whether it is a running back that they get back in a trade. I mean, I feel like we never see player-for-player trades in the NFL, even though I floated the Pacheco hypothetical earlier. We never actually see that. But if JT gets dumped off this roster, they probably do bring in a guy like Kareem Hunt, who we've already seen go on a visit to Indy and is still out on the market. Maybe they bring in a guy like Leonard Fournette, and those guys would probably be the guy in Indy. I think there's reasonable value there. I mean, if they bring in a vet like that, neither one of them has too much left in the tank, but the Colts as a whole, again, the O-line is good enough. I think Anthony Richardson as a running quarterback will hopefully open things up a little bit in the run game for whoever they bring in. Flex guy. maybe it's a cop-out answer, but whoever the Colts starting running back is, if it's not Jonathan Taylor and it's not an actual high-value, high-talent guy that they bring in return, if it is Fournette, Hunt, or if they don't add anybody and it's Deion Jackson or Evan Hull, I think you're looking at a flex guy. It's a starting running back on a team, right? Like that's going to have some level of value.
You're always going to consider that.
You're going to have something. I don't know that they go running back by committee. Maybe they would if they don't bring anybody in. You just get Hull and Jackson. It is a fucking mess. But I think flex is the ceiling of the value you're looking at here.
Yeah, I think a lot of their options are going to come from, guys that might get cut. We talked about Deontay Foreman. We talked about Rashad Penny. Talk about Damian Harris. Guys, I could easily see them kind of being in the market for guys like that. But you look at it, it's been a pretty even split between Evan Hull and Deion Jackson. And we've seen Deion Jackson perform pretty well in some opportunities in the last 2 seasons. But if JT does get traded and they don't go out there, it's just a mess. Like, I don't, at least until we see one of them emerge, I'm not going into the season thinking that either of them is going to be a reliable fantasy starter. But, I could be wrong. But yeah, flex is fair because, like you said, it's a starting running back. It's a starting running back, and especially in the middle of, at certain points in the year, if a guy's a starting, you've got guys getting picked up on waivers who it's like, oh, well, if this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens, then he'll be the RB1. So, like, if you have someone that's
right.
got a lot more of a direct path to playing time, you're going to at least consider it. But the upside there is not much.
Yeah, it's not much. I mean, look, every single team in the NFL's starting running back, regardless of how murky the situation may be behind them, is at least a flex-worthy guy. Like, I guess let's look at who the worst starting running back would be in terms of fantasy value right now. Is it? I guess it's probably Raheem Mostert because it's just such a clear split with him and Jeff Wilson. But even that, that's a reasonable flex in the right matchup, right?
He's going to be drafted.
I think that's what you're looking at here. If it's Evan Hull or Deion Jackson or whoever the fuck. If they trade JT and bring in Kareem Hunt and Leonard Fournette, I'd feel pretty decent about it as a flex. Not thrilled. Yeah. But yeah, that's what you're looking at there. And then this question from Thomas on Instagram. Do you think Tyler Boyd has a solid upside in the middle rounds? Tyler Boyd has no upside. That's why I identified this question. Tyler Boyd is the most boring pick you could possibly make in terms of a receiver. And it's just a guy that, like, yes, is Tyler Boyd better than Nico Collins? Yeah.
No.
I would rather draft Nico Collins.
I would rather draft Nico Collins.
Maybe not, but I would rather draft Nico Collins 10 times out of 10. Like, it's just such a low ceiling play. It's like the only time you're going to be excited about starting him is if Chase or Higgins gets hurt, and even those splits are not what you'd think they are. Like,
even when Chase got hurt last year, he wasn't good.
Yeah. No, you look up what he's done without Chase, it's not much.
I had a decent bit of Tyler Boyd last year, and when Chase got hurt, I'm like, oh, thank God, finally this is going to happen. It just didn't happen. The guy's just a very mid-wide receiver. Obviously he's established. He's done some things in his career, but he is a clear third. And again, that's another offense similar to Miami. They don't really have a third, and they don't really need one. You're looking at Boyd or maybe even Irv Smith, but I wouldn't be surprised if neither of those guys emerge. And it's just a whole lot of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And I especially late in these fantasy drafts, you don't want to take a guy like Tyler Boyd. You want to take the Nico Collins. You want to take my boy Michael Wilson in Arizona. Like, you want to take someone with upside. Tyler Boyd is he just feels like if you draft him, he's the first guy you cut when you pick someone up before the season even starts. I can't get behind taking him really at any point. I'm not going to draft him at all.
No, at Fantasy Pros, he's wide receiver 55, and he is behind Darnell Mooney, Alan Lazard, Nico Collins, Kadarius Toney, and then he's above. So here are the guys that are behind Tyler Boyd. Odell Beckham Jr., Romeo Doubs, Rondale Moore, Adam Thielen. Look, some washed up names here for sure, but guys that I would take a stab on. I'd much rather
have Romeo Doubs.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Guys that I would much rather take a stab on, even looking further down the list. DJ Chark in Carolina, I think he's going to be the number one. Yep. He has upside to be a startable flex every week. Alec Pierce, Anthony.
Him too.
And the one thing we know he can do is chuck the deep ball. Alec Pierce dropped one in maybe the most notorious clip of the preseason, but again, we don't put too much stock into that. Jonathan Mingo, just guys. Tyler Boyd's been in the league for too long now for you to hope for any more than what you've seen so far. That's all it is. Upside is the last word I would associate with Tyler Boyd. So yeah, exactly. I would say no. Just there is a point where you chase upside and a point where you don't. The point where you chase upside is the point where Tyler Boyd is generally being drafted. So no,
exactly.
Pick somebody else. We are not on the Tyler Boyd train. Pat, any final thoughts? Great pod today. Great job. You look great.
We've got our pals and boys and fellas and whoever else today. I sexualized Kyle Pitts
boys.
instead of so I'm just going through the tight ends here. Sorry about that. I'm not that sorry, honestly. So that's my final thought is I'm not sorry.
It's not.
I also doxed myself, so like it's been an episode.
Not the first tight end you've sexualized. We all remember the Chickaconquo incident of you wanted to peg him a month or so ago, a month or two. Don't raise your eyebrows at me. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Off the Bench, everybody. Thank you for watching. For Pat Gustafson, I'm Brandon Carney. We will see you guys next week for Cut Day.